Think about someone in your life who irritates you. Not someone who has genuinely wronged you, just someone whose presence, the way they speak, the things they say, the way they carry themselves, gets under your skin in a way that feels disproportionate. You can't always explain it, you just know that something about them bothers you more than it should. Carl Jung had a very specific answer for why that happens, and it has almost nothing to do with that person. In this video, we will look at what Jung discovered and why the people who irritate us most are often showing us something we have spent years trying not to see about ourselves. Stay with me. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist who spent his career trying to understand the parts of the human mind that we cannot see directly. One of his most enduring discoveries was something he called the shadow. The shadow is not the dark side of your personality in some dramatic, cinematic sense. It is something both simpler and more uncomfortable than that. It is everything you have decided you are not. Jung observed that every child, as they grow up, learns very quickly which parts of themselves are acceptable and which are not. The child who expresses anger too openly is told they are being difficult. The child who wants too much is told they are greedy. The child who shows weakness is told to toughen up. The child who is too loud, too sensitive, too ambitious, too passive, each of these receives a signal, repeatedly, that this part of them is not welcome. And so the child does the only sensible thing available. They push those parts down, not out of malice, but out of survival. We all need to belong. We all need to be accepted. And so we become, very early in life, editors of ourselves, cutting out the chapters we have learned are too difficult for others to read. Jung called what remains in the conscious personality the persona, the face we show the world, carefully constructed to be acceptable, admirable, or at least tolerable. And what gets cut? What gets pushed down? That becomes the shadow. The shadow is not destroyed by being hidden. It is not reduced. It does not disappear. It simply moves into the dark, into the part of the psyche Jung called the unconscious, and it continues to live there, exerting influence on everything we think and feel and do without our awareness. Jung wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." This is one of the most important sentences in all of modern psychology. It means that the more completely you believe you have eliminated a part of yourself, the more certain you are that you are not angry or selfish or afraid, the more powerful that hidden part becomes. Because the shadow does not sit quietly, it has an agenda. The shadow expresses itself in one of the most consistent and revealing ways available to the unconscious. It projects. Projection is the psychological process by which we see in other people what we cannot see in ourselves. This is where we return to the person who irritates you. When someone triggers a reaction in you that feels larger than the situation warrants, when you find yourself genuinely disturbed by someone's arrogance, or their neediness, or their dishonesty, or their laziness, Jung would ask you a very specific question. Do you recognize this quality in yourself? Not, have you ever acted this way? But, is this something you have forbidden yourself to be? Because the irritation is rarely about what you think it is about. The arrogant person who infuriates you may be showing you an ambition you have never allowed yourself to own. The needy person who exhausts you may be showing you a vulnerability you have spent years pretending you do not have. The dishonest person who disgusts you may be showing you a compromise you have made and have not yet been willing to examine. This is not a comfortable idea, and it is important to be precise about what it means and what it does not mean. It does not mean that the person who irritates you is behaving correctly. It does not mean that your feelings are invalid. It does not mean that every strong reaction is a projection. What it means is this: the intensity of the reaction is information. When the irritation is disproportionate, When the same quality in different people consistently produces the same outsized response in you, something else is at work. Jung had a phrase for this that is worth keeping. That which we cannot face in ourselves, we attack in others. Think about the judgments you make most quickly and most harshly, the people you write off fastest, the behaviors you find most intolerable. These are not random. They cluster. They have a pattern. And that pattern, Jung argued, is a map of the shadow, a negative print of the parts of yourself you have most thoroughly rejected. The shadow appears in other places too, not only in irritation. It appears in the recurring themes of your dreams, in the fantasies that embarrass you to admit, in the emotional outbursts that seem to come from nowhere, in the envy that surfaces when someone else gets something you would never admit to wanting. All of these are the shadow trying, in its own way, to be seen. Here is where most people misunderstand Jung. The shadow is not simply a collection of your worst impulses. It is not a catalog of things you should be ashamed of. Jung was very specific about this. The shadow contains not only the darkness we have rejected, but also the light. When a child is told that their intensity is too much, they push down their intensity. When they are told their sensitivity is weakness, they push down their sensitivity. When they are told their creativity is foolish, they push down their creativity. When they are told their ambition is unseemly, they push down their ambition. These are not flaws. These are capacities, and they sit in the shadow, alongside the genuine darkness, indistinguishable, mixed together, waiting. Jung called this the golden shadow, and he believed it was often more difficult to integrate than the dark shadow because it requires something that can feel almost as threatening, the admission that you are more than you have allowed yourself to be. The person who cannot accept that they are envious of someone else's success may be hiding not only envy, but a legitimate ambition they have never given themselves permission to act on. The person who cannot tolerate someone else's emotional expression may be hiding not only their discomfort with vulnerability, but a depth of feeling they have never allowed themselves to access. The person who dismisses others as too intense may be protecting a part of themselves that is, in fact, deeply capable of intensity and has simply decided that intensity is not safe. This is why Jung considered shadow work, the conscious examination of what we have hidden, to be not a descent into darkness, but a return to wholeness. Not the addition of something new, but the recovery of something that was already there. He wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And the darkness he was referring to was never only darkness. It was everything we have not yet had the courage to claim as ourselves. You might ask, what is the consequence of leaving the shadow alone? Of continuing to manage it the way most people do, by remaining unaware of it, or by suppressing it whenever it surfaces, or by simply redirecting it onto the people who trigger it? Jung's answer was that an unintegrated shadow has a cost, and the cost is paid everywhere. In relationships, the person who has not examined their shadow tends to repeat the same patterns. They are drawn to people who carry the qualities they have rejected in themselves, and then become hurt or furious when those qualities cause problems. They project their unacknowledged needs onto their partners. They mistake their projections for perception, believing they see their partner clearly, when in fact they are looking at a mirror they have not yet recognized. This connects directly to what Fromm showed us in our last video. That genuine love, the kind that requires truly seeing the other person, is impossible when what you are actually seeing is a projection of your own unconscious. In the broader world, Jung observed that projection operates at a collective level too. Societies that are not willing to examine their collective shadow find an external enemy on whom to project it. The qualities a culture cannot accept in itself, its own violence, its own greed, its own fear, become the characteristics attributed to the other side. to the outgroup, to whoever is most convenient. This is not a political observation, it is a psychological one. And at the individual level, the cost of the unexamined shadow is what Jung called a narrowing, a gradual contraction of the self. The more you edit out, the smaller the space you are able to inhabit. The more you reject, the less of the world you can actually afford to encounter. Because the world is full of the shadow. It is reflected back from every difficult person, every uncomfortable situation, every reaction that surprises you with its intensity. The unexamined shadow turns the world into a place you can only navigate defensively, always managing triggers, always avoiding what might stir something that should not be stirred. The examined shadow is different. It turns those same triggers into questions. Jung did not offer a simple method. He was suspicious of simple methods. He believed that genuine self-knowledge was one of the most difficult things a human being could undertake, not because it required great intelligence, but because it required a particular kind of honesty that most people find genuinely threatening. But he did offer directions, and they are more accessible than they might seem. The first direction is this: pay attention to what irritates you in others. Not to catalog your grievances, not to confirm your judgments, but to notice the pattern. When you feel a disproportionate reaction to someone else's behavior, when the emotion is stronger than the situation seems to warrant, sit with the question: is there something in this that belongs to me? Not, am I exactly like this person? But, is there something here that I have rejected in myself? Is there a version of this quality, perhaps less extreme, perhaps differently expressed, that I have pushed down because I decided it was not acceptable? The answer will not always be yes, but often enough, when you look honestly, it is. The second direction is to notice your fantasies and your envy. Envy is one of the most reliable compasses the shadow provides. When you feel genuine envy towards someone, not admiration, not inspiration, but the specific ache of wanting what they have, Jung would say that is not simply a character flaw, it is a signal. It is the shadow pointing towards something you want, but have not given yourself permission to want. What you envy is often what you have hidden. The third direction is the most difficult. Be willing to be wrong about yourself. The shadow only loses power when it is brought into conscious awareness, and it can only be brought into conscious awareness if you are willing to entertain the possibility that your self-image is incomplete. Most people have a very coherent story about who they are, and that story, however reasonable it seems, has been constructed partly to protect the shadow from being seen. You are not only what you have decided to be, you are also everything you have chosen not to look at. Shadow work is not a project with an end date. It is, as Jung understood it, the ongoing work of a lifetime, the continuous expansion of the space you are able to honestly inhabit. And it begins, simply, with the person who irritates you most. You do not need to begin with a therapist, or a journal, or a course. You need only one question, and enough honesty to sit with it. Think of someone who consistently irritates or disturbs you, someone whose behavior you find most difficult to tolerate. And ask yourself, without judgment, without the need to arrive at a flattering answer, what is it about this person that bothers me most? And then, is there any version of that quality in me that I have not been willing to look at? You do not have to find the answer immediately. The question itself is the work. Because the moment you stop attacking the shadow in others and start getting curious about it in yourself, something changes. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the world becomes a little less threatening. Your reactions become a little more your own. The people who used to exhaust you become a little more interesting. And you become a little more whole. That wholeness, the honest encounter with everything you are, not only the parts you have approved, is what Jung spent his entire career pointing toward. He called it individuation, the lifelong process of becoming, as fully as possible, yourself. If this video made you think of someone specific, someone whose face appeared in your mind while we were talking, that is not a coincidence. That is the shadow, doing exactly what Jung said it would. Share this with someone who is willing to ask hard questions, not because they need to hear it, but because the conversation that follows might be worth having. And if you have not yet watched our videos on Viktor Frankl and Erich Fromm, they are waiting for you. The three ideas form a single argument that the most important work you will ever do is the work of becoming honest with yourself. Subscribe to the Lucid Mind, not to fill a feed, but to keep walking.